presentation. So one is age-related macular degeneration, which is even shorter form known as age-related macular degeneration. We do not tell them at ARMD. More commonly is AMD, but anyway, both of them are same. Epidemiology, if you go there, near about 10 to 13% of the adult over the age of 65 years is affected with this kind of disease. And as we having the life expectancy is getting better and better, so the more amount of the older population is getting added to our system. So the age-related diseases is of utmost important. Now, out of these, for these, there are in all over the world there are multiple big age-related study was done, out of which from US, that is a Beverdam eye study, which showed almost incidence is 1.5. Rotterdam eye study from Europe that shows 1.6, and Blue Mountain eye study from Australia, these shows 1.8. So in between 1.5 to 2 is average, incidence of age-related eye disease is here. The Indian data, we have almost similar to that. So one is from Andhra Pradesh eye disease study and from another from Arvind Eye Group. So both of them are showing is almost, one is 1.8 and another one is around 3. So around 2 to 3%, 1.5, 2 to 3% is almost. So more we will have the advanced age group, so we'll have the more number of cases. So to know that, first, if you see that what are the types of age-related macular degeneration, one group is neovascular AMD, but that is only consisting of the 10% of the disease. The majority of them are dry AMD, which consists of almost 90% of the disease. And out of which again, actually the vision loss is a reverse. In the vision loss for AMD, 80 to 90% vision loss is responsible for the neovascular AMD, and only 10 to 15% is responsible for the dry AMD. Now, let's have a quick look to the pathogenesis of the neovascular, non-neovascular AMD pathogenesis. So if you have an insufficient oxygen, and then you have a, I think we'll just minimize it, and insufficient oxygen and the nutrients. So there is damage of the photoreceptor of the molecules, the aging process, RP cells, they get diseased, and then there is an excessive accumulation of the residual bodies, which is not being gulped by the macrophages. And RP membrane and cells are slowly getting degenerated and atrophy sets in. So here also you can see there is, this is the drusen. I'll come into detail about it, how the drusen was that, which is leading to the photoreceptor and RP atrophy. That is exactly what do we see in case of dry AMD. Now, these will have a drusen, which can be small, intermediate, or large, and hard, soft, or confluent. These are the types of the drusen. Now, drusen is one of the most important pathognomonic feature for AMD. You need to remember drusen is one of the most important pathognomonic feature for AMD, both for neovascular and non-neovascular AMD. So to know about it, little bit of it, hard drusen, they are very small, round, and discrete, and they are little whitish yellow, more towards the whitish side of it. And the soft drusens are larger, indistinct, with the margins are not very indistinct. They are usually large and coalescence. So they are more prone to, with the soft drusen, which is more responsible for your, for the disease progression. Similarly, the basal laminar drusen, which is multiple small uniform round subretinal nodules. I will show you the pathology of how it looks like. Another group is a calcified drusen, which is not much of important for AMD. Now, histopathology of a drusen, if you see, there are small round yellowish lesion located at the level of RPE and causing the thickening of the Bruch's membrane. So here, if you see, this is the photoreceptor, and at the level of RPE, you can see there is a deposition which is leading to the bumpy swelling of at the RP level. So this is known as exactly as drusen, which is PAS stain positive, periodic acid stain positive. Now, dry AMD, how the disease progression occurs, which is non-neovascular also. You have a drusen, which is, they get coalesces together and they form a drusenoid PED. then that leads to RP changes or the apoptosis of the RP cells. And then the secondary atrophy of the choriocapillaries, underlying choriocapillaries occur, leading to secondary atrophy of the outer retina, which is known as geographic atrophy, and it looks like this. A neovascular AMD pathogenesis is little different. Here the angiogenesis is one of the most important part of it. So how does it occur? So here also there is a photoreceptor and pigment epithelial cells, there is a damage to that, and the choriocapillaries, from the choriocapillaries there is the new blood vessels, they grow first under the RP, then above the RP, and then it comes of different level. And this neovascular blood, which is very, they don't have they are totally different from a normal vessel structure. They don't have the proper, intimal layer and everything. So they are more leaky vessels, easy to rupture. So that's why the fluid, which is one of the important part of it, and the hemorrhage is also important, feature of neovascular AMD. So if you see it off, this is in a normal condition, and then this is from the choriocapillary. There is a ingrowth of the new blood vessels, and these new blood vessels then they grow under the retina. This is a similar kind of picture, if you can see. Hello. Yeah, this is a similar kind of picture you can see from there is a neovascular complex which is formed under the RPE, and these are the photoreceptor cells. From RPE it grows there, and this is the picture exactly how it looks like. This is the area where you can see specks of hemorrhages is also present, and if you notice very minutely, can you see these multiple dots here temporal to that CNVM? These are the drusen present over here. So if we classify them, so based on the FFA, we classify them as a classic, occult, or mixed CNVM. Now, how these are classic? These three variety. These are not of much of use because we are not using. Initially, in early 2005 or 2000, we used to use this classification more because that time this was FFA based. The OCT was not that time prevalent, so FFA based classification was more. So classic means when you can see if you do a fluorescent angiography and it starts leaking from the very early phase and then slowly increasing in intensity and the area. This is called classic CNVM. When in the early phases you don't see, rather a hypofluorescence you can see, and in the late phases you can see a diffuse hyperfluorescence from undefined source, which is quote unquote that undefined source which we usually talk about. This is more of the classic occult, but majority of them, neither classic or occult, majority of them comes as a mixed variety, of which we can tell that it is a predominantly classic or predominantly occult CNVM. So this is how to show it. This is to show you this. You see the first row of it. This is occult CNVM. This area is having, you have the CNVM here, and which is increasing, and later phase also it is increasing, but you have see the diffuse surrounding area also, you have a diffuse source of hyperfluorescence which is increasing. This is again a mixed variety, of which you can see the central part which is increasing in the fuzziness at the later phase. So this is the part which is actually a classic part, and rest of the area which is surrounding this area which is also increasing in the later part. So this is of the occult part. So this is a mixed CNVM. Now in case of predominantly classic, in the immediate period also you can see here, this is hyperfluorescence associated with hypofluorescence. This is due to this hemorrhage associated with it. So this hyperfluorescence which is increasing in intensity and size, this is predominantly classic. Now, which is more important right now, what we do use it of is OCT based classification. Now, because OCT, you all know that it is a non-invasive procedure and you can repeat it as much as possible. So this is more of a use right now. So we divide it of type 1, type 2 and type 3 CNVM. What is type 1? That is sub RPE. So when in the formation process, it forms under the retinal pigment epithelium. So that is as a sub RPE CNVM. This is type 1. Type 2 CNVM is a subretinal. Now there may be a subretinal sub RPE component also there, but if it is majority, it comes to type 2, then it is comes under the RPE. Then above the RPE, then it is type 2. Type 3 CNVM is mainly intraretinal CNVM, which starts either from the upper part of the capillary complex of the RPE of the retinal complex, or it develops from the deep complex, but it is predominantly for the intraretinal component. But again, being intraretinal component, it can go both ways. So it can start from the intraretinal component and it can go down and present as a subretinal component as well. So now if we combine both OCT based and FFA based classification together, then type 1 CNVM is most of the occult CNVM, type 2 CNVM is most of the classic CNVM, and type 3 is most of the cases it is a mixed CNVM. But even type 1, which may have a type 2 component, can also have a mixed variety of CNVM. I think this is most important for you to understand, because next the treatment modality and everything will depend upon on these classifications. Now I can show you here very fantastic way of showing it. This is the OCT. This is the RPE layer. If you see, this is the RPE layer. There is a subretinal fluid here. So there is no component which is above the RPE. And this is the normal retinal thickness you can make out. So this is classically type 1 CNVM, which is lying under the retinal pigment epithelium. But if you see this component here, you can see clearly make out this is the area where you have a neovascular complex, which is above the RPE, because this is the RPE line and this is the subretinal fluid. So this is type 2 CNVM. This is the type 3 CNVM, where you have a pigment epithelial detachment, but majority of the CNVM complex is lying in this area, so which is having this is an intraretinal component. Now, based on the classification, location-based classification, this is also important, because on this basis also we will decide about the treatment modality. So extrafoveal, if it is more than 200 micron from the center of the fovea, so it is extrafoveal. Juxtafoveal, if it is coming from 1 micron to 199 micron, so up to 1 to 200 micron is juxtafoveal, and any component of the CNVM is lying under the fovea is known as subfoveal CNVM. Now, to tell you briefly what may be the symptoms of this kind of these AMD patients, they may be asymptomatic totally. So early stages of dry AMD patient can be asymptomatic. There may be decreased vision, central scotoma, maybe metamorphopsia or photopsia also sometimes. These are the major presentation. Or other form of presentation can have like glare, decreased contrast sensitivity. These are all different forms, but out of which mainly if you see that central scotoma, metamorphopsia, photopsia, decreased vision. So these are all major symptoms for presentation. Now, if you start investigating them, of which signs, most important signs I'll just discuss now. Fundus evaluation is one of the most important, followed by slit lamp biomicroscopy, and majority of them you can identify this age-related macular degeneration by first two methods. Autofluorescence, fluorescent angiography, OCT angiography, and ICG can be all the ancillary tests to help you out and decide about the treatment modality. Now, slit lamp biomicroscopy, it has to be very meticulous. In slit lamp biomicroscopy, you can see a gray or grayish yellow subretinal lesion. If you can make out here, you can see there is a subretinal grayish yellowish lesion here. This is, which is maybe little elevated, and there may be associated with subretinal fluid or hemorrhage, which you can see it here. Or there may be a deposit of the subretinal lipid component, or there may be associated some part maybe of the fibrous tissue. So that shows that scarring of one part may be the scarred or the reactivated CNVM also you can get it. Now, in case of autofluorescence, This is most important for dry AMD, and this is the geographic atrophy, which is showing the margins of the geographic atrophy, which is very important here. And this can be of of our important, because you can document it, and in future also the progression of the geographic atrophy can be noted. Fluorescein angiography is when the OCT was not there, this was the main tool for to decide about the treatment. So still now fluorescein angiography is not obsolete, and we have to use it in a few of those cases. And in case of geographic atrophy, you can see a typical hyperfluorescence window defect of those areas. But in case of OCT, which is being a non-invasive, this has taken upper hand over fluorescein angiography, and this clearly delineates the anatomical changes which is occurring due to age-related macular degeneration. If you see it here, this is classically, you see there is a presence of subretinal fluid, there is a pigment epithelial detachment, there is retinal elevation, there is elevation of the retinal pigment layer, uneven bouncy different layers, or there may be sometimes the cystic changes which is occurring here. So presence of there may be subretinal fluid or sub RPE fluid also present. So all levels of presence of fluid, maybe intraretinal, subretinal, or sub-RPE, presence of solid or serous PED, these are all you can make out with OCT, and then accordingly you prognosticate it. OCT angiography, I'll just for mentioning, I'm just doing it. This is anatomical and functional both together combining, which we are getting it off now, which is not available in majority of the centers. But again, for you to understand that OCT angiography is a tool which gives you without angiographic picture, without pushing a dye, or the fluorescein angiography method is not there. So this is also a non-invasive technique, and there you can get both anatomic and the functional component of the, so this is of one of the most important tool which is coming up now. This is how, just to show you how it looks like in case of Octa. You can see the CNVM complex nicely delineated here. This is not by any fluorescein angiography, but this is by the OCT angiography. How does it look like? Now, you must be hearing the term of multimodal imaging. Now, multimodal imaging is also coming up in a better way, because if you combine FFA, information from FFA, OCT angiography all together, then you get all the information of, and then you can decide on the treatment. So multimodal imaging is another way of treating it by more precisely. But as of now, for you, OCT and fluorescein angiography, these are the two which, if you can tell them in the examination, that is more than enough. ICG angiography is also when you look for the mainly for the choroidal pathology. Specifically, if you try to differentiate between ICG, between occult CNVM or a polypoidal choroidovasculopathy or a RAP lesion, these are the differentiating picture. So it may help sometimes when you are not sure about the diagnosis of what it is. So the ICG angiography can help you for differentiating these pictures. Now, if you go to the treatment modality, it has changed a sea change from 1980 to till date. So if you see, there was in 1980 there was no, before 1980 there was no treatment. In 1980, after the macular photocoagulation study, then we used to directly do the laser over the CNVM area. So before that was a vision loss, and then after that, after 90, we used to think of the halt of the disease progression. So first was thermal laser, followed by early 2000 there was a photodynamic therapy, and then comes 2005-6 was the sea change which has occurred in case of treatment of AMD. And from here, we have always started thinking of improvement of the vision. So for dry ARMD, the AREDS which is age-related eye disease study. Based on that, we have some recommendation of the treatment of the supplement which is needed for this, which helps for the disease progression, to halt the disease progression. So this is just, you can take a screenshot of it. I think if you go to the AREDS study, you can get it from there also, exactly what is available. But nowadays, a lot of fixed dose combination is available, so we are using those. Now, treatment of wet AMD. Now, mainstay of treatment as of now is anti-VEGF. Other than that, photodynamic therapy is also second line of treatment. But transpupillary thermotherapy and focal laser is still possible if you have an extrafoveal CNVM. But transpupillary thermotherapy we are not using now much, not of much use. Submacular surgery has been tried a lot of different areas, but again, the outcome is not as good like anti-VEGF or the photodynamic therapy. So still the treatment modality lying in between these two. So again, like if we you know, what I was discussing from 1980 to 1991, 1999 till 2000, then photodynamic therapy, then AREDS came out in 2001, and then most important from 2004-5 onwards, we have our anti-VEGF in our basket, so which is main treatment modality. Now, if you have what I was discussing, if you have an extrafoveal CNVM, you can directly do the laser photocoagulation to this. If you have a juxtafoveal, then the laser photocoagulation is not advisable. Either you do anti-VEGF therapy or you do a PDT. If it is a subfoveal, then anti-VEGF treatment is the first line of therapy. Now, what is this VEGF? Actually, what is this vascular endothelial growth factor? So this is one of the important, marker which is responsible for angiogenesis in neovascular diseases. Now, of which then whole VEGF family have VEGF A, B, C, D, E, F. The whole series is there. Now, and even on top of it, there are placental growth factor, platelet-derived growth factor. So forget about it. So if you just remember them, that the VEGF A is one of the most important factor which is playing pathogenesis for the ocular angiogenesis. Now this is a little complex, you don't need to remember. So if VEGF A is how it develops, causing binding with the receptor and then causing tubal formation and elongation, remodeling, then the vessels maturations occur. So in short, VEGF A is one of the most important factor which is responsible for the neovascular angiogenesis. Out of which VEGF 121 and VEGF 165, these are the two most important. So pegaptenib, when it has come first, which is actually an inhibitor of VEGF A 165, and that's how we started with our journey with anti-VEGF therapy. Now, what is rationale of giving an anti-VEGF therapy? So VEGF plays an important role in angiogenesis by acting, vascular permeability, and it stimulates cell migration. By this, there is a choroidal, and it has and inhibits the apoptosis process. And most importantly, it is very much located in retinal and the choroidal structure. So what you get advantage of by giving anti-VEGF therapy is anti-angiogenic factor you are getting, anti-angiogenic effect you are getting, anti-permeability you are getting, so the leakage becoming less, and to some extent anti-inflammatory therapy is also we are getting it off. What are the anti-VEGF we are using routinely as pegaptenib, ranibizumab, bevacizumab, aflibercept, and there are some new drugs on the pipeline which is keep on coming. Just to give you an idea what is photodynamic therapy, it is actually a dye which is known as Visudyne. Trade name is Visudyne. This is a verteporfin drug which has been injected according to the body surface area and body weight calculation, and then you inject it over a period of 10 minutes, and then you put a gap of 5 minutes and then start firing with specific laser of red laser of 689 of nanometer of wavelength. So this is how exactly, and by this this is a very active drug which by the activation of those laser, they get their release a new what we call as the nascent oxygen. This is nascent oxygen means this is only normal oxygen is in the O2 form, so you get a only O form of oxygen, and that is very, very highly oxidative material. So it causes oxidation of those endothelial cells of the new blood vessels. It does not have the direct effect of the normal mature blood vessels. So the new blood vessels, the endothelial cells, they get oxidized and damaged, and then slowly the new blood vessels regresses. So that is the basic pathogenesis, I mean the science behind the photodynamic therapy. Now for anti-VEGF, there are different, not for anti-VEGF, for all the treatment of AMD, the different trial. I'm just mentioning them: Focus, Marina. You just 3, 4, 5, just name is sufficient enough for you. Marina, Anchor, Pyre, Sailor, Pronto. That is more than enough for you. I don't think that you need beyond this. And Maximum, CAT and IVAN trial. These are the two trials which is Avastin and ranibizumab. Bevacizumab and ranibizumab have a direct head-on trial. So that's all for the third year PGT. If you Maximum, if you can remember this. Most important is that along with this is a lifestyle modification, which also you need to guide patient to avoid smoking, drinking. Ultraviolet protection is also is a proven protective measure for age-related macular degeneration. And to avoid more of a junk foods and have green leafy vegetables, fresh fruits, or fish has a good fatty acids, so which is more protective for us. But most importantly, these patients needs follow-up, and you have to have them follow up with AMSLA grid chart. So if you tell in examination, then I'll give injection and then follow up with the AMSLA grid chart. And every visit, I will see the patient and I'll document their vision, we'll do OCT. I think that is enough for you to talk about. Stem cell and gene therapy is coming up for this. I think I'm done with RMD.
I think it was a beautiful presentation, Dr. Rupa.
Don't stop sharing the screen. Continue in that.
You have covered totally everything. Beautiful pictures. There's nothing that remains to be discussed. I think the classification of age-related macular degeneration, the wet form, is very important. As he mentioned, the FFA based and the OCT based, along with the clinical features and the treatment. So very nicely discussed. There is one terminology which examiners ask many times and which the PGs get confused, is the two different terms, geographic atrophy and disciform scarring. So, Dr. Rupak, are they the same, or is the etiology different in both?
Dr. Sangeet, would you like to comment on this?
On geographic atrophy and
disciform scarring. Is this the one and the same things, or is there some difference in etiology?
no, they are not the same thing. The geographic atrophy generally we see by the cells, the photoreceptors dying out, and the atrophic areas. Mainly it happens in dry AMD, and in disciform scar, it is the formation of the scar fibrous tissue below the retina, and generally when you look at fundus in geographic atrophy, what you will see is there will be a concavity of the retina. The retina gets thinned out, whereas in disciform scar, it will be the opposite. The retina gets thickened, and there will be a lot of scarring, and there will be some fluid also beneath the retina, which is not present in geographic atrophy.
Yes, sir. I think that is about it. Basically, disciform scarring is a sequelae.
This is how to differentiate between the two, and there are also, but I think, yeah. And
Rupak, you will
geographic atrophy generally occurs in dry AMD.
I think Dr. Sangeet has very clearly mentioned the geographic atrophy, which is actually a sequelae of dry AMD, and disciform scar is actually sequelae of the wet AMD. So following treatment, because what we call as a CNVM is a neovascular, fibrovascular, there is a vascular component and the new vessels component. So once the new vessels component dries up, the the fibrous component remains there. So vascular component, after going the fibrous vascular component, the fibrous component which is remaining under the macula is a disciform scar. And compared to that, geographic atrophy is usually a dry AMD, which causes discrete outline and have this photoreceptor and RP cell atrophy.
Yes, sir, that's absolutely correct. There are one or two questions, Dr. Rupak.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. What is outer retinal tubulation?
I think that is a very good question. But again, he has asked about the pathophysiology of dry RMD. This is again because of the hypoxia. The hypoxia is one of the most important that leads to, you know, the metabolic because of the hypoxia. There are two issues. One is the tissue apoptosis occurs early, or the cell death occurs early, and due to early and more amount of the cell death, and because of you have a thinner blood vessels which have the less supply of the blood, so the macrophages are not able to engulf those, you know, apoptotic products. So they are getting accumulated under the retina and they are getting deposited over the RPE, which is known as drusen. And these drusens are causing their toxic material. These are actually supposed to be, you know, taken out if these are toxic material, and they causes photoreceptor and RPE atrophy. That's how the pathophysiology, in brief, the pathophysiology of dry RMD. And outer retinal tubulation is again is one of the most important, not most important, it was an important finding in cases of you know, OCT. You can get a retinal tubulation, is a nice round retinal tubulation, which is again is a pathophysiology of inner retinal, the inner retinal component is also there. So the presence of, in short, presence of retinal tubulation is a bad prognostic factor for treatment protocol.
Another question is, why is the verteporfin drug taken up by the new vascular tissue? And
they have a more predisposition towards the new endothelial cells, and the receptors in the new endothelial cells are much more than the mature endothelial cells. So that's why they get, you know, entrapped with those new blood vessels, endothelial cells. That's how they get damaged.
Any role of melatonin in ARMD?
Any role of
one of the
no, this is again a controversial role. This is again a controversial.
You needn't know, you needn't be very specific about melatonin. You just have to know what is there in ARIDS2. All that slide
Exactly.
Dr. Rupak showed, that is more than enough. And then what is CAT2 trial?
पढ़ना पड़ेगा बाबू. CAT2 अभी से बोलना is a big thing. So CAT2, I don't think that it is needed at the PG level. CAT and IVAN trial is more than enough. So if you remember, CAT trial is direct head-on trial of bevacizumab and ranibizumab, and by these two, almost both of them, there are non-inferiority wise, both bevacizumab, the effectivity of bevacizumab and ranibizumab is almost same. So that much, if you can remember and tell in examination, I think that is more than enough.
Dr. Sangeet, do you have any more comments to make? Any tips or comments?
I don't know. I have never heard of CAT2 trial. I have never heard of it. I think you must be confusing it with AREDS2 rather than CAT2. I don't think there is any trial in the name of CAT2 that is going on.
Oh,
but AREDS2 is there.
CAT2. Okay, yeah, true.
If there's
In AREDS2, what they are studying is they are now studying the beta carotene free antioxidants, whether they are helpful in controlling dry AMD or not. That is one major difference between AREDS1 and AREDS2.
Other macular pigments also, macular pigments is also included in AREDS2. So like zeaxanthin and lutein and zeaxanthin, yeah. So
There's
this is the
another
minor
question.
difference between those two.
There's another question. What is the pound sign in OCT of optic pit with macular detachment? I don't think this is applicable for this topic.
Is pound sign? I'm not sure about it. What exactly you do mean by that?
To read about it, I've heard of it.
If there are no further questions, we'll go on with the next presentation, Dr. Rupa,
Yeah.
on retinitis pigmentosa.
Do you want me to again make you the host?
I think yes. So, but this is really nice discussion is going on. The questions what we are getting nowadays from the PGs is really encouraging. Don't you think, Dr. Pooja?
I'm sure the good part is that we read sometimes. When you don't know some of the questions, it goes.
True,
You have to read it.
absolutely true. I think retinitis pigmentosa is one of the important for them. Is it comes as a long case, no? Sometimes, if I remember correctly. So if it a long case, so majority of them they will stick to key what is usual signs, symptoms, and what are the investigations you will do. So these are usual, questions come. So let me.
It's a long question. That is why we purposely taken it up here.
Yes, yes. So can you take a quick questions of which layer of inflammation occurs in retinitis pigmentosa? In case of retinitis, like choroiditis or retinitis, so which layer of retina gets inflamed in retinitis pigmentosa? Fastest finger first. Dr. Pooja, can you take up few answer of it?
It says rods and cones.
Rods and cones are getting inflamed. Okay, and then any other?
Any
Dr. Pooja
other?
has already started laughing. Any other answer? Which layer? Dr. Kapil, most active person in this group.
No inflammation in RP.
No inflammation in retinitis pigmentosa.
Oh, that's great. Yes, so this is one of the misnomer in that way. So there is no inflammation as such. In that way, this is a misnomer, but it is a pigmentary changes which is occurring, and initially the picture was looking like an inflammatory condition. So that's why the name came as a retinitis pigmentosa, and the legacy is going on. So what is happening here? It's a variety of hereditary disorder, primarily affecting mainly photoreceptor and RPE. So actually there is no inflammation, but the apoptosis of the photoreceptor they occur, and it has a little more predisposition. I mean, preponderance of a male versus over the female, and it can affect all races and ethnicities. The slides are not moving. Okay, so this is how exactly looks like. So this is the retinitis pigmentosa. You have the waxy pallor of the disc. There is narrowing of the retinal arterioles, not all the blood vessels. There is little bit narrowing of the venules as well, but the retinal arterioles which is more affected, and there is bony spicule in the mid periphery or sometimes in the closer to the posterior pole. So this is the triad which is known as the triad for the retinitis pigmentosa. So ocular manifestations, yes, which I have mentioned just now, the typical bony spicule of with the intraretinal pigmentation and attenuation of the retinal arterioles. This is, you need to remember, retinal arterioles are more attenuated, or the gliotic or waxy pallor of the disc. So symptoms wise, the patient have a slow dark adaptation. So if they move from light area, from a bright light to the dark area, then they take usually longer duration to get accommodated with it. They have sometimes difficulty in night visions, or even if they talk about difficulty in dim light. So sometimes if they go to the restaurant, they sometimes discover that if they go to the restaurant in the dimly light area, then they feel difficulty when the others are moving there normally. So, this is then next step comes as a visual field restriction, because this is the disease which starts from the periphery of the affecting the peripheral photoreceptors are more affected, and then comes, so the visual field restriction comes there. And in the late stages, there is a significant vision drop due to pallor of the disc, and there may be associated posterocapsular cataract, subcapsular cataract, or there may be associated macular edema. These are the two another additive factor which can cause decreased vision. But these both of them is, cataract is always a reversible, and this macular edema is also a reversible process to some extent. Phenotype and genotype wise, they vary considerably. I think you can read from the book, which is very, very given. I think Yanov is one of the most important book where it is given very thoroughly. So if anybody can go through Yanov, that is more than enough. This is just X-linked recessive. What are the dystrophies may be associated with, like this is a retinitis pigmentosa. So they have also typical like features of retinitis pigmentosa. The differential diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa who has the kind of night blindness. So what are the differential diagnosis of night blindness? They can come into here. So starting from vitamin A deficiency and everything can come into before you examine them. So once you examine them, then obviously there are a lot of other diseases which can rule out. The CSNB, the fundus is usually normal. Vitamin A deficiency also, fundus is normal. Juvenile retinoschisis also they present like with the similar kind of picture, but there may be associated, if there is macular schisis is also there, then you can have the similar cystic changes in the macular area. But again, you will not out of all, and even rod cone dystrophy or cone rod dystrophy also can have, patient can present with night vision symptoms. But again, out of all those first 2-3 what I have mentioned, all of them, they usually have a normal fundus except juvenile retinoschisis, which you may get a retinoschitic area as well. But which is more commonly confusing, this is what we usually see is a old bilateral tightly done panretinal photocoagulation. So which is also looks quite nicely, but I'll tell you how to differentiate those two, or a spontaneously reattached retina. Now, spontaneously reattached retina usually does not occur in both eyes in a very, very rare condition, number one. So if it is, usually it is unilateral, whereas RPE we get it mostly in cases of it is bilateral. Tightly done RPE also you can get along with bony spicules. Other than that also you can get the pigmentary changes which is occurring in those areas, but you will get more larger discrete laser burns. So if you notice them very carefully, you will have a larger different sizes of burns are there, and in between there are pigment clumps are there. Whereas here you will not get the burns absolutely like this. Here you will not get the burns. You will see this. If you see number 1 picture and number 2 picture, you can see there are multiple confluent areas of the pigment clumps are there, and they have usually kind of a distribution of branching vessels kind of distributions, because they get accumulated in the initial phases along the branches, along the venules, or along the blood vessels they get distributed. So that's how is differentiating picture. And this picture is, there is a panretinal photocoagulation. You can see the discrete marks are there, and along with that you will get pigmentary changes. So the pigmentary changes occurring here and occurring here is much more different what you can make out here. Spontaneously reattached retina usually looks like this in the right down picture here. Usually it involves in one quadrant only, and the other parts are absolutely normal. And most important of all those picture is, if you can make out here, that the venules are of normal, you can make out, but the arterioles are absolutely almost obliterated. Whereas you can see here vein and the artery both are of, the normal caliber. So this is how exactly you can differentiate these areas. The diagnosis comes by fundus evaluation and fundus photography for documentation, any family history, electroretinogram, and visual field testing is one of the most important, and dark adaptometry, if possible, we do it off. But visual field testing, you need to remember, is not usually by doing, sometimes, central 10-2 or 30-2 may not give you the picture of involvement. So 120 screening in visual field test is one of the important tool by which you can make out or you can document the progression of the disease. ERG, not the multifocal ERG, a global ERG can give you about the functional ability of the photoreceptors. The systemic association, which is again comes in long case or maybe in your long question or long case also they can ask you. Usher syndrome is one of the most important association. They have type 1, type 2 and type 3, but the most important, the association is with the hearing loss. So if you have a hearing loss along with retinitis pigmentosa changes and patient is deaf or dumb along with retinitis pigmentosa changes, your diagnosis goes towards Usher syndrome. Barrett-Biedl syndrome also, you have a typical picture of polydactyly, short stature, they have truncal obesity. So this is exactly given, good picture has been given in Kansky and other different books also, you can see it. Along with that, if you have a paraplegia, then it goes as a Lawrence-Moon-Biedl syndrome. Kearns-Sayre syndrome is another part of it. So retinitis pigmentosa along with external ophthalmoplegia, along with ptosis. So these are all other ocular manifestation which you can have along with in Kearns-Sayre syndrome. This is also another association, but these are the patient usually they don't survive for longer period. Now the treatment, the role of vitamin A is how many of you believe that vitamin A can help in retinitis pigmentosa? Fast, 30 seconds.
You can type in your chat box. Kapil says no, there's no role.
Okay, so what medicine would you like to give, Kapil?
The majority of them say no role of vitamin
No
A.
role.
Proven role.
Fine. So vitamin A actually does not have an role. As you know, it's a hereditary changes which is occurring. It's a degenerative disease. So it is not a vitamin A deficiency disease as such. So the role of vitamin A, there are multiple study has been done and there is no role as such of vitamin A. Patient counseling is one of the important part. If associated with either macular edema, cystic changes or PSC cataract, then you can do a cataract surgery. If there is a CME changes, then topical dorzolamide or oral dorzolamide have some role in these kind of cases. But again, NSAID does not have that much of role. Low vision aid is one of the most important, help or relieving, way for this kind of patient to have, because few of the patients, they get early, affected in their early life and their career and the study becomes difficult. So in those kind of cases, low vision aid and proper counseling and guiding them for choosing their career, it also are helpful. And most promising is gene therapy. Gene therapy is coming up in a big way. How many of you are aware of gene therapy? So what is this new gene therapy name? This is the last question of the day. What is the drug available? Do you know any drug available here? Yeah, I got the answer, Luxturna.
Very good, Dr. Ishaq.
Very good, very good. And next question is, what is the cost of the therapy of this is if you can answer, it goes for what you call is a honors mark or distinction. This is your Luxturna. Any of you guess?
$25,000.
Okay, last question, you are bored now. It cost, bilateral treatment is cost Indian currency almost 6 crore.
6 crores?
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you give injection, this is subretinal space, you need to give injection, just you need to do a little elevation of the retina and then go there and do it subretinal space, you inject this drug. And this is the actual drug name is Voretigene. The Voretigene, it not available still now in India. In US, it is available almost near about almost 2 years, 2 to 2.5 years. but cost in Indian currency is almost like 3 crore plus 3 crore in both eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rupak. Excellent presentation. There's an interesting question by Dr. Vishak Thomas. Why pigmentations occur in the mid-periphery and why are they bony spicule in shape?
Good question. That's what I was just describing. No, it is getting affected in the mid-periphery, and these pigmentary changes is initially it takes along the blood vessels. So that's how, if you can I share those slides again?
Yes.
Oh, no. Anyway, so the picture what I have shown you, unlike to that, you see the distribution of those pigments are along the blood vessels. So that's why they have the kind of a tree branching kind of distribution compared to the pigmentary changes which occurs in case of laser treatment.
It's more intracellular spaces they occupy. That's why they are spicules like.
Correct.
Why is there arteriolar attenuation and 1 second. Can you just scroll down? Why is there arteriolar attenuation in retinitis pigmentosa?
Sorry, your voice got cracked. Can you just repeat it once more?
Why do the arterioles attenuate in retinitis pigmentosa? Is the question.
Okay, so this is again pathologic changes. So this is one of the late features of arteriolar changes. So initially, arteriolar changes is not that much. Initially, you will get changes in the bone spicule. And as the peripheral supply, the hypothesis for this, as the peripheral photoreceptor cells and associated inner retina degeneration occurs, then the blood vessel supply slowly goes down and the arteriolar attenuation occurs.
I think that should answer your question.
And there is, sorry, Dr. Sangeet was telling.
Yeah.
There is another thing, arteriolar attenuation can occur early also.
Yeah.
Say you can see some patients, they will come to you, and I think once you are postgraduate, you should be seeing the arterioles very carefully in these patients. There won't be any other changes, just arteriolar attenuation will be present. And then you suspect that this is a patient of retinitis pigmentosa, and the patient will come with a history of night blindness, and there will be no other changes, just seen because the rods, they do degenerate, but there will be no bony spicules, there will be no disc pallor, but only arteriolar attenuation will be seen. So this is you have to see in some patients, like in retinitis pigmentosa, sign pigmento, there will be no pigment changes, but arteriolar attenuation will be there. So this, you have to look for this arteriolar attenuation also when you are describing retinitis pigmentosa. All just Dr. Rupak has pointed out, all these three things are in the classical case of retinitis pigmentosa, but all these three things can be present independently also in retinitis pigmentosa.
Yes. And the pigmentary changes, again, you need to understand the pigmentary changes when the the RPE changes, RPE is affected, then only you will get the pigmentary changes. Once it is only in the photoreceptor stage, then you may not get, rather you will not get of the pigmentary changes as much. There you will see the granular, mild granular changes in the mid periphery and the periphery. So there also, what Dr. Sangeet was telling, so that because of the inner retina is getting damaged, so the retinal arteriolar attenuation can occur early, other than pigmentary changes. So pigmentary changes depends upon when the involvement of the RPE occurs. Damage of the RPE occurs.
Mid periphery, because the rods are more concentrated in the mid periphery rather than in the macular area. So retinitis pigmentosa generally starts with the cell death, and that's why it is seen more in mid periphery rather than in the macula. Macula sometimes may be affected early, but generally it is a late presentation when macula is.
Yeah, that is expansion for the mid periphery. Yes. And
it's been a very good discussion, and if there are no further questions, I think we can ask Dr. Satyajit to give his thank you remarks.
One more thing that Dr. Rupak, I think not discussed is the treatment in the form of retinal, this artificial retina, and many implants are now being developed for retinitis pigmentosa patients. I don't know, I can't say how much useful they are. I have not seen any patient getting those implants. But that is another thing you have to keep in mind. Your examiner may ask what are various options in the treatment of retinitis pigmentosa.
yeah, I think thank you, Dr. Sangeet, for mentioning it. It has got omitted. So actually, this is called retinal chip implant. So artificial retina or the retinal chip implant. This is going on for quite some time. This is even before this the gene therapy has come. So almost like more than a decade this is going on. There actually the depends upon, I'll just in very 30 seconds I'll just explain. There's a small chip like this. They implant under the retina or in front of the retina, and they just pin it over the retina at the macula area. And the photo which is generating over there is actually being transmitted through the wire, and it has been transmitted to the occipital cortex. So that's how is the photo has been imaged there. But again, the result is not that promising. So that's why the study was almost left at that level.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Rupak, for the beautiful presentation. I would also like to thank Dr. Sangeet Mittal and Dr. Pooja Sinha for the beautiful moderation. I'm sure the postgraduates are benefiting a lot. Tomorrow we have a beautiful presentation by Dr. Anirudh Maiti, who will be giving an overview of vitreoretinal surgery. And we would love to have you, Dr. Rupak, tomorrow also. I just want to put a point of appreciation that because yesterday Dr. Rupak could not connect well, today he did not go home. He has stayed back in the hospital for the benefit of the postgraduates so that the connection is good. And today the presentation was really very nice. It went on so smoothly because the internet connection in his hospital at BBI Foundation is good. After all, even though with all the difficulties after the storm in Calcutta, all the speakers, Dr. Rupak Roy, Dr. Saurabh Sinha, Dr. Rupak Kanti Biswas, you have really put your heart and soul into this program, and I'm deeply, deeply indebted to all of you at BBI Foundation for making this possible. A lot of this is getting recorded also and getting circulated among the postgraduates for revision also, which is getting circulated throughout India. For the postgraduates who are listening, once the entire program gets over, you can write to me and we will send you the recordings so that you can revise before your exams also. Once again, a big thank you to everybody, and I'd like to thank Dr. Sangeet, Dr. Rupak, and Dr. Pooja once again. Thank you so much, and see you tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And this same link will be there. Next week, it's for the postgraduates. Next week, we will have glaucoma again for a week, and then we are going to take a break. For the last 1 month and 1 week, we have been doing this every day at 5 p.m. So I think even the moderators, the organizer, and everybody needs a little break. So we'll take a 2-week break, and then we'll start with cataract, cornea, and different topics. So the next week will be glaucoma. But tomorrow is the overview of vitreoretinal surgery. And the day after, Dr. Sangeet Mittal will be talking on how to interpret the OCT, which is something very, very important. And pictures will be shown to you in the postgraduate exam, and you will have to tell the answers. And that is the class you must attend, and you must ask all your friends also to attend. Thank you so much. Take care. Goodbye and good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Satyajit.
Thank you, Rupak. Thank you, Dr. Sangeet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.